Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to continue the discussion about taxes, but let's not. Mr. Garamendi, Mayor, welcome. Sorry I missed your earlier testimony, but I do have a question for you. We seem to have many folks, some of whom are in this room, and others who are not, that seem to want to ignore the issue of man-made climate change. And really, it's my view, and perhaps it's yours, our nation cannot wait to address this critical challenge. The recent fires in California, including the Camp Fire, which was the deadliest up in the Paradise area, and very near my congressional district. We've seen firsthand that. We've seen it in your community, well, just outside your community. So my question, Mr. Mayor, is would you please speak to how your city and the municipalities across California are making investments in more resilient infrastructure, and how important this is for the municipal and county governments to have a federal government as a real partner in that process of creating resiliency in the area of climate crisis.
Absolutely. There's no question that from Houston to the Florida Panhandle, California, we're seeing that impact. I mean, I always say, forget what your ideological perspectives are. Talk to a firefighter about whether climate change is actually happening. Talk to a rescue worker about whether it's happening. Something's happening out there with extreme weather. I think we know the science, but that said, we've had firefighters die on the line. We've had roads that are inadequate access. We've rethought infrastructure in California, certainly in Los Angeles. We use now resilience not just as an issue area for a few specialists, but really a prism for all of our infrastructure. When we repave a street, it's a complete street. We think about the water drainage, we think about the trees that we're going to plant, the heat island effect and what sort of tree canopy we're going to have. We think about the color of the streets. We think about the long-term, maintenance of that street. We think about the emergency access, and to the chairman's point, what lights we're going to put on and how smart they're going to be to get emergency vehicles in and out quickly. It has fundamentally made us rethink everything because the loss of life and the loss of property makes human beings do that. And I think we have a pretty good package that we can share with the committee of some of those elements of how we look at infrastructure in a resilient way. And when I said that second piece of innovation, I would also look at in this legislation, what can you do to reward innovation in resilience in infrastructure? Even if it's a very small piece to carve out, I think that the technology is changing enough and the appetite is there, as well as the real innovation in states and the local governments, which are the laboratories of democracy.
Thank you. Mr. LaHood, Mr. Secretary, enjoyed our time together when you were on that side of the table. I guess I'm still on this side. Something that I've dealt with over my career, half of the National Park Service's deferred maintenance backlog, so $6 billion, is in the transportation infrastructure projects. The last major transportation bill, the 2015 FAST Act, passed by Congress, funded the Federal Lands Transportation Program for national parks and all federal public lands at about $300 million. In California alone, our national park transportation infrastructure backlog exceeds $800 million. So, Mr. Secretary, while we ponder transportation funding here, why is that funding so critical in national parks? And if it is, should it be included in legislation?
Well, it's critical because of the fact that so many of our citizens use the national parks. And they're very important to the people of America who want to enjoy those parks. And it is a federal responsibility, should be, and obviously the money to keep up our national parks should be included in the program.
Excuse me for interrupting, but having spent a wonderful 10-day period in the parks in the Southwest, I would also suggest from my own personal experience, it's a significant economic engine for those regions.
Totally.
And so that's another piece of that
Right.
puzzle beyond
Right.
protecting these very special assets. I want to call you my colleague, Tim. Governor, would you like to comment on either of these two questions in the remaining 13 seconds?
Well, I would go on the parks piece, and it is an economic driver, and this is another one where there's some great bipartisanship available. We all care about these resources. Cynthia Loomis, the former Congresswoman from Wyoming, and I did the National Park Stewardship Act that did some public-private partnerships to bring in and make some capacity to do that. We know the backlog is huge. We have to tackle it. When we do that, we increase our quality of life, we increase our economic growth. So we're supportive. States would welcome that, those who are to home to national parks.
Very good. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I thank the gentleman. With that, we turn to Mr. Babin, and I do note that Secretary LaHood previously informed us he'd have to leave at 11:30, so if he leaves, it's not because your question insulted.